Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and we now have a conclusion to the Suitcase murder out of Florida. And 47-year-old Sarah Boone denied until her last moments in the courtroom. But let's get you caught up on the story before we explain her sentencing hearing that happened on Monday. Sarah Boone and 42-year-old George Torres Jr. were boyfriend-girlfriend, and this was all in early February of 2020. This relationship was fraught with domestic violence. George had been arrested multiple times for DV against Sarah, and Sarah had been arrested one time for DV against George. And as so many DV cases play out, Sarah bailed George out for each of his 4 assaults on her. Now, the reality is some people just shouldn't be in a relationship. And all of this aggression in this relationship, well, it came to a head on February 24th, 2020, when a game of alleged hide and seek turned deadly. Sarah claimed that George and she had been kind of like chasing each other through the home, roughhousing a little bit. The two decided to then play a game of hide and seek. But I'm not sure they understood the rules of that game, or maybe they were just too lit to remember the rules. But this game had Sarah running to the shower and hiding, and George, who was just 5 feet 2 inches tall and 103 pounds, well, he slid himself into a suitcase that was on the floor. When Sarah realized that George wasn't coming to find her, she crept down the stairs and noticed George in the unzipped suitcase. At least that's her story. She told authorities that they had a good laugh together about the fact that a grown man could fit in the suitcase. But then Sarah said she felt like this would be a good time to teach George a lesson. She said she had recalled the abuse that she had suffered at the hands of George, like the time that he slashed her leg with a steak knife, or like the time that he slammed her head into a metal door. And so she told authorities that she decided to zip the suitcase closed and seize the opportunity to tell George everything she felt while he couldn't lash out at her. Now, I can't believe she thought this was a good idea, but she did, and she zipped it closed and started expressing her anger about their relationship. Well, George wasn't happy, if you can imagine, and Sarah told the authorities that it got heated between them very quickly, with George begging and yelling to be let out. He told Sarah he couldn't breathe. When she realized he was uncomfortable, she began mocking him. There's even video of it. This part isn't alleged. She took 2 videos of him zipped into the suitcase. Now, on those videos, she called him names and reminded him of the times he had abused her. But what wasn't on the video, well, according to Sarah, were the threats that George was yelling at her from the closed suitcase, allegedly telling her that he would effing end her when he got out of that case. Well, at one point, George was able to wiggle his hand through a small opening between the zipper and the suitcase. In response, Sarah said she was terrified, and she used her son's baseball bat to hit George's hand until he slid it back inside the bag. Sarah said she then fled the room, claiming she was, quote, terrified that he would get out and attack her. But she didn't flee the house. Instead, she went upstairs to her bedroom and fell asleep. When she awoke 9 hours later, she wandered around the house for 2 more hours before going downstairs to look for George. She said that's when she saw the suitcase and remembered that she had zipped George shut inside. She told authorities she had never experienced anything like that moment. And my thought was, of course you haven't. People don't zip other people closed in suitcases. And then she said that was the moment when she was aghast that he was still inside that suitcase hours later. She testified that she unzipped the bag and pulled George out, saying he was purple and gurgling. Sarah's first thought? No, it wasn't to call 911. She called her ex-husband, who then told her to get off the phone and call 911. George was pronounced dead when EMTs arrived on scene. And when investigators arrived at the scene, Sarah willingly turned over her phone for detectives to just kind of do a cursory look at what had been occurring over the last few hours. In a quick search, investigators found the videos of George struggling in the suitcase and also of her mocking him while he was struggling in the suitcase. When she was questioned by police about those videos, she said she could not remember recording them. She eventually was charged with second-degree murder, and the battle within the courtroom was one for the record books during that 4 years before Sarah went to trial. Sarah has a lot of, let's call it personality. See, 8 different attorneys represented Sarah over that 4 years. 7 of them were court appointed. Finally, after the 7th withdrawal, Judge Michael Kranick said, "No more court-appointed counsel for you. You forfeit the right with your behavior." Well, this led Sarah to representing herself at some of the hearings, including one hearing back in July. This was just prior to her trial in October. Well, in that hearing, she submitted a letter to the court with a hand-drawn advertisement for a lawyer. Well, guess what? It worked. The media circulated the advertisement, and a private attorney took her case. And that attorney did the work. He met with prosecutors pretty quickly and negotiated a plea agreement with Sarah admitting to guilt in a manslaughter charge, that in exchange for a 15-year sentence. But it was Sarah who said no to that plea deal. She wanted to take the case to trial. So that happened, finally, on October 14th. And Sarah faced a jury of 6 of her peers, and she even took the stand in her own defense. Her attorney had set up the argument that Sarah suffered from battered women syndrome, and during her testimony, she told the jury she still loved George, even after his death. She said that George suffered from 2 bodies with 1 soul, and that each body behaved separately. It's kind of a weird thing, but that's what she told jurors. Her attorney then went on to highlight the alleged abuse and even showed jurors photos of Sarah's injuries over the months that her and George were together. Well, during cross-examination, prosecutors pushed Sarah on her account of how George even ended up in that suitcase. They asked her if she pushed him into the suitcase. The prosecutor referenced earlier testimony by a neighbor who heard a loud thump on that fateful night. Well, Sarah doubled down, and she said George willingly entered the suitcase. During the cross-examination, the prosecutor had Sarah show the jury how she zipped up the suitcase. This included her getting off the stand and actually physically zipping the suitcase closed. I cannot even imagine how powerful that was for the jury to witness that action. When asked by the prosecutor if she did anything at all to help George once he was zipped into the suitcase, Sarah flatly said no. Well, following a week and a half of trial testimony and, of course, opening and closing arguments, the jury took 2 hours to find Sarah guilty of second-degree murder. And on Monday, Sarah was sentenced to life in prison. Before the judge handed down the sentence, Sarah was allowed to speak in the courtroom. And to the bitter end, Sarah never wavered on the idea that she was the victim in the whole saga. During her read statement, she listed multiple grievances against George. This included complaints about his family not intervening in the alleged abuse. I'm going to remind you, his family was in the courtroom. She also unleashed on detectives and the prosecution and the media for portraying her in a bad light. She even went as far as telling the media that they had, quote, blood on their hands and keyboards. She finished the statement by forgiving herself for not escaping an abusive relationship. She said the following phrase, "I forgive myself for falling in love with a monster." Now, during her statement, and also during the reading of her sentencing, Sarah showed very little emotion. There were no tears, there was no reaction, and during the victim impact statements, George's sister said that she wants Sarah to rot in hell. She said in her own life, she can't even use a suitcase because it is too traumatizing. She also said she'll have a lifetime of pain because of the videos that she watched of Sarah taunting George while he pled for his life while trapped in that suitcase. Now, that life in prison sentence, well, Sarah has to serve a minimum of 22 and a half years before she can be considered for parole. That will have Sarah in her late 70s when that happens. And as a reminder, she said no to the negotiations of a 15-year prison sentence. George left behind 3 children and several brothers and sisters. Following the trial, so many people searched out George's obituary page and left tributes on the wall. I hope his family felt love from that army of people. All right, let's get an update to the potentially voluntary disappearance of Hannah Kobayashi. Now, we haven't discussed the search for Hannah at all because I was traveling through the Thanksgiving holiday, and that's when all of this broke. So let's just get caught up. Here's the timeline. On November 8th, Hannah flew into Los Angeles from Hawaii. She's supposed to be hustling to a connecting flight to New York City. It's like something like 47 minutes that she has to get from one flight to the other. But she actually misses the flight. On airport camera footage, she is seen wearing a black hooded sweatshirt, tie-dye leggings, and a dark green backpack. The next day, Hannah is spotted at the Grove Shopping Center in LA. This was at about around noon. The day after that, Hannah is caught on camera back at the Grove attending a Nike event that was happening there that day. She even posts a photo from the Nike event on her Instagram. Then on the 11th, Hannah returns to LAX where she picks up her luggage. Okay, you've got to remember, her luggage probably flew to NYC and back because she missed her connecting flight. LAPD states that this is the last place that her phone pings. The phone has still not been found. Hannah's aunt said that Hannah spoke to an American Airlines ticketing agent somewhere between 4:30 and 6:30 that day. Later that night, Hannah uses her passport during a purchase of a bus ticket for a destination near the California-Mexico border. Now, this has been verified by the LAPD. At 10 p.m., Hannah is spotted on video near the Pico Metro station in downtown LA. The family told USA Today that Hannah was not in good condition on that video and that she wasn't alone. LAPD has since said they have contacted the man that Hannah was with on that video and that he has provided a full sequence of events from their time together. Well, on November 12th, Hannah is seen crossing the U.S.-Mexico border near San Isidro. Again, the LAPD confirms that she was not alone on that video. Now, it's important to understand that I'm giving you the timeline as it is being reported now. When I was writing this episode on December 3rd, Hannah's family had no idea about these events until days after they happened. And that is why they don't report her missing until November 12th. Remember, that's the day she crossed over the border into Mexico. The next 12 days, so from the 12th to the 24th, they're full of tumult for the family. They're searching for Hannah, even flying across country to find her. And they have no idea that she has potentially crossed over into Mexico, and also that she wasn't alone when she did so. On November 24th, Ryan Kobayashi, okay, that's Hannah's father, well, he is found dead at a location adjacent to LAX. Hannah's family quickly issues a statement confirming that Ryan's death is a suicide. 2 days later, so just before Thanksgiving, the LAPD confirms that investigators believe Hannah intentionally missed her flight at LAX. That same day, the family disputes that claim, saying she absolutely was in distress and missed her flight accidentally. And then on Monday, Hannah's case was reclassified to a voluntary missing persons case. LAPD says this is primarily due to the video footage of her crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. The family based many of their concerns during this whole thing on the concept that the 30-year-old woman sent a string of out-of-character text messages that included mentions of her not feeling well. She also was claiming that someone had stolen her ID and her money. Now, those texts were happening before the Nike event, but after the missed flight. Her aunt told USA Today that her family just can't shake those messages sent to multiple people. She says they just don't make any sense because Hannah used emojis in all of her texting. Like frequently she would put a little heart or a flower, but those last string of texts apparently had no emojis included. Well, the LAPD on Monday said that the family doesn't seem to be to blame for Hannah leaving voluntarily, meaning there wasn't abuse or a need to flee control. Her aunt confirmed to USA Today on Monday, following the announcement, that no one in the family had any indication that Hannah was headed to Mexico. She also verified again that Hannah has had zero contact with any of the friends or family searching for her, and that she has not posted on social media since the Nike event. On Monday, the LAPD said they found evidence that Hannah was looking to step away from connectivity. They followed that up with this statement. Are we 100% right about that? We can't say. We just know that she did not have her phone after she left LAX. We know she doesn't have her phone on her right now. Well, they went on to also confirm that the search for Hannah will not continue into Mexico. In America, her case will remain open in the missing and unidentified persons system. If she uses her passport to re-enter the country, the LAPD will be automatically notified. Now, following the announcement on Monday, the family closed the Facebook group that had been set up to aid in finding Hannah. Her aunt thanked all those who had helped in the search, but she said the family had received death threats, and for their safety, they felt they needed to close the page. She vowed the search for Hannah will continue. Now, I could not find a clarification on what those alleged threats looked or sounded like. I can say that the search for Hannah has been a roller coaster with more questions than answers. And all of that has led to some people thinking they know exactly what happened, even if it's clear we don't know what happened. Newsweek is reporting that the family is somewhat dissatisfied with the investigation, citing that the LAPD announced Hannah's age as 23 when she is actually 30 years old. And they also allegedly misreported the day that the family informed LAPD she was missing. Hannah's sister said that the lack of communication surrounding some of the most important details has left them feeling excluded from crucial updates to the case. She also said the family found out about the crossing into Mexico and about the reclassification of the case just hours before the LAPD announced it publicly. She did say they are remaining hopeful that the LAPD will do everything possible to find Hannah. I just ache for Hannah's family. First, they lose Hannah in suspicious circumstances. Then their father completes suicide. And now they are faced with the idea that Hannah is in a foreign country where it seems no one's looking for her. I'll keep you updated if there ever is an update. And now this quick update. We covered this story back in early May of 2023 when 36-year-old Eric Hutchinson and 34-year-old Samantha Miller were celebrating their wedding in Folly Beach, South Carolina. As the two newlyweds left the party as passengers in a golf cart, their night ended unexpectedly in tragedy when 25-year-old Jamie Kobayashi plowed into the golf cart, driving 65 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone. Samantha was killed instantly in the accident, while Eric was left extensively wounded. Two other passengers in the golf cart were also seriously wounded when the intoxicated Jamie smashed her Toyota Camry into the back of that golf cart. According to South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, Jamie had a blood alcohol content of 0.261. You guys, that's more than triple the legal limit. At the scene of the accident, police said Jamie refused a breath test, so her blood was taken at the hospital. She was initially charged with 3 counts of felony DUI and 1 count of reckless homicide. Well, up until this week, Jamie was taking this thing to trial, even though there were multiple witnesses. There was body cam footage of her interaction with police, and quite honestly, there's a community that was united with the newly married and then widowed Eric. And that body cam footage? Well, it shows a dazed and confused Jamie who seems to believe she didn't hit anyone or anything. Instead, on that body cam footage, she believes something hit her. She was also shown repeatedly asking to go home and saying she did nothing wrong. Okay, that wasn't going to look good in the trial. And it got worse for Jamie. She was caught on recorded phone calls from the jail saying phrases like, "I can't believe this happened to me. I'm going to be here for years and years and years." She also, on those phone calls, called the crash a, quote, freak accident. With a recorded blood alcohol 3 times over the legal limit, that also was not going to look good in a trial. So on Monday, Jamie pled guilty to 2 counts of felony DUI, resulting in great bodily injury. She also pled guilty to 1 count of felony DUI, resulting in death, and also reckless homicide, resulting in death. And as far as plea deals go, this one is so close to the original charges. Her attorney claimed that she pled guilty with the intent to show remorse for her actions, and also that Jamie understood that punishment was warranted. She is expected to serve 25 years behind bars, as the various sentences will run concurrently. At the plea hearing, Lisa Miller, okay, that's Samantha's mother, well, she explained to the court that she is employed as a counselor and she has worked at times with people who suffer from substance abuse. She said in her experience, the only way those people find better health is to suffer the natural consequences of their actions. Lisa also replayed the celebratory events of that tragic day, and she compared what was supposed to be the happiest day to it ending in a nightmarish reality. Samantha's sister Mandy also spoke, and according to Law and Crime, she seemed very angry in her statement. She lamented that so many lives were altered that day, including her personal life, because she packed up her family and moved from Florida to be closer to her mother during the grieving process. Samantha's biological father spoke to Jamie directly, saying, "For the rest of my life, I am going to hate you. And when I arrive in hell and you join me there, I'll open the door for you." Well, Jamie cried softly through most of the testimonies. One of the golf cart passengers, 17-year-old Brogan Garrett, told the court that he was injured and knocked unconscious in the crash, but he eventually woke up in the ER to Eric, the groom, screaming in pain. And that brings us to Eric, the man who lost his brand new wife that night. He told the court he suffers physical pain every day, even though it's been 19 months since the crash. He said one of the final sentences that Samantha spoke to him on that night was, "I don't want this night to end." And then he told the court that he wishes more than anything that he had died that night instead of Samantha. He directly told Jamie that it haunts him every day that he is still alive while Samantha is dead. He also said he couldn't believe that more people didn't die when the intoxicated woman slammed into the golf cart. And in the most heartbreaking moment, he closed his statement to the court by reading a paragraph from his wedding vows that he had spoken to Samantha just hours earlier. He said the following, "I will love you today, tomorrow, and until I take my last breath on this earth. I am forever yours." He then turned to Jamie and said, "Those words were spoken hours before you killed her." Well, I'm sure you're asking if Jamie addressed the court, and she did. She apologized to the family, turning to look at them directly. She also acknowledged that no apology could undo the tragedy and that she will live the rest of her life in immense regret. As a reminder to this case, Eric did file suit against the bars that allegedly overserved Jamie on that fateful evening. The 3 businesses and Eric settled the suit, and Eric was awarded $1 million. And in one of the updates that I brought you, this was just a few months ago, we discussed that Eric and Lisa Miller, that's the bride's mom, well, they were fighting over Samantha's estate. Eric said he had offered Lisa half the money that would be coming from the lawsuit and half of the estate of Samantha. And Lisa said Eric was only concerned for his welfare. She even questioned the validity of the marriage since the nuptials were only hours old. Now, I couldn't find any sort of update to the beef between the mother-in-law and the son-in-law. All I can do is hope that Samantha has been honored in the process, even if it did get a little bit ugly. And how about this Thanksgiving horror story that would probably make sitting next to your loud Aunt Bonnie not seem so bad, because at this Thanksgiving, somebody ended up murdered. Okay, this all went down on the day before Thanksgiving when two roommates, 65-year-old Richard Lombardi and 80-year-old Frank Griswold, were preparing their turkey dinner in their shared home outside of Boston. And for all of you Christmas vacation lovers, his name really is Griswold. Well, it seems on that day, Richard was doing most of the preparation, and he didn't like that Frank was hanging out in the kitchen so much. Finally, after losing his patience, Richard allegedly grabbed Frank on his back and shoved him to the side away from the food. According to the prosecutor, that's when Mr. Griswold's feet got all tangled up and he fell to the floor and hit his head on the ground. Well, recognizing what had happened, Richard called 911, telling dispatch that his roommate was on the floor bleeding and unconscious. And according to police, when Richard was asked why he didn't want his roommate near the food, he said that Frank had a habit of sneezing and he didn't want him to sneeze on the prepared food. Well, it might not be all innocent or accidental, though. There's some concerns here, maybe some red flags. Okay, here's how it laid out. Richard admitted that he and Frank had been arguing earlier in the day about Frank being in the kitchen. Richard said Frank had left the kitchen, but returned later to wash dishes, and Richard allegedly felt like the sink was too close to the Thanksgiving food. Court documents include description of the wounds to Frank, and those descriptions reference cuts on his face. That has left some people puzzled about how he cut his face if he just fell to the floor when he was shoved aside. Now, this whole story got so much worse for me when I read that the two men have been friends since early 1990, after they met in their careers in the financial service industry. The two became roommates in 2001, and they had shared the home outside of Boston since 2008. 30 plus years of friendship destroyed over a Thanksgiving meal. Richard's lawyer told the court that he had no idea Frank had died until hours after the incident. Richard is being held in the Plymouth County Jail without bail. He is scheduled to appear in court today. And now to this listener's suggestion from Tiffany. This story is out of Utah and is about a drunk man who thought he was shooting a skunk and it turned deadly. On October 4th of this year, 39-year-old Darren James Entz was readying his camping trailer for an overnight trip. It was daytime hours, and Darren was throwing a few drinks back while prepping for his camping trip. Darren told authorities that he thought he saw a skunk on his property. So he took at least one shot, supposedly aimed at a skunk. Unfortunately, the shot meant for that stinky creature was in the direction of the roadway near Darren's rural home. After Darren fired the gun, he told authorities that he noticed dust, most likely from a UTV. So the somewhat inebriated Darren jumped into his own UTV and he drove towards the dust cloud that was north of his property. When he arrived, he said he found an elderly man in the driver's seat of the UTV, but he was slumped over onto an elderly woman in the passenger seat. Darren called 911 because it's obvious this man needed assistance. When the deputies arrived, James Allen, that's the elderly man, well, he was airlifted to a hospital nearly 200 miles away. You guys, this is really rural. Unfortunately, James died the next day from a gunshot wound that hit him from behind through the rear window of the UTV. That bullet was allegedly meant for the skunk Darren said he saw. Detectives believe the bullet went through the hat the elderly man was wearing and struck his head. The elderly woman was not physically hurt in the errant gunfire. Deputies had blood drawn from Darren on that October 4th day, and last week, the results of the blood test determined that Darren had a blood alcohol level of 0.10. Detectives arrested him and charged him with negligent homicide. Darren did admit to the shooting, but he said he could not hear the UTV because he had his truck running and also a generator running. Darren will be arraigned on December 10th. As of the recording, he had yet to be assigned an attorney. James Allen was 83 when he died. According to his obituary, James was a member of the Steelworkers Union for 43 years. He was the father to 4 children and grandfather to 3 grandchildren. Despite a raging issue with hay fever, he made his living as a farmer in the later years. If he wasn't farming, he was fishing, and his family said he always left the world better than the way he found it. Maybe that should be all of our goals. Leave it better than we found it. And now to the comments over the last week. First off, someone asked if there has been any update to the young woman found dead in the Walmart walk-in oven in Canada. The answer is not really. Police have said that no foul play was found in the death. That was reported about 2 weeks ago. Now, during all of that reporting, I heard from multiple people that you can't accidentally lock yourself in the walk-in ovens. So that doesn't check out. And pretty much police are now being mum about everything else. They just said there was no foul play. So basically, they're saying she died accidentally, and that's all. I know that is super unsatisfactory, but that's all I have at this point. I'll keep watching to see if there's more. And to Ren Flanagan and Lojo62 on YouTube, you are welcome. They're both so glad that I brought light to a Native American case. And to Felicia Engelbrandt 6268, hope I said that right, the Murder with My Husband and Rise in Crime community are here for you. We can get you through the dark world, and we'll do it together. I also feel like I need to address the multiple opinions about Gabby Petito and her parents' lawsuit being dismissed by the Utah judge. Okay, look here. I'm just bringing you updates. I didn't choose a side in the Gabby Petito case with the lawsuit. In fact, the reality is all sides lost in this case. And I'm not a huge fan of civil lawsuits, even though they're necessary sometimes. But we need to realize it's part of the true crime story. And I'm going to bring you an update like this one, even if it does make you feel like you're wearing an itchy sweater. That irritation is warranted, but it's news, and I'm going to bring it to you. Also, I love seeing your Spotify Wrapped lists. Let me know if Rise in Crime is on it. All right, that's your Thursday episode of Rise in Crime. Thanks for joining me here. Really do appreciate it. I've already heard from multiple people that this is one of their top podcasts for the year. That is so gratifying. I'm so glad you're here with me and that we're doing this together. Please continue to send in your 5-star reviews and your positive comments because that does help the podcast grow. And I'm going to give you a little sneak peek. There is something exciting coming from Ono Media, specifically Peyton Moreland. Be looking for that at the beginning of the new year. Join me again on Monday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.